aged 7 and 3, were infected as well. We're incredibly grateful that we were vaccinated, because obviously we didn't have severe disease, although from our experience, the infection, even and breakthrough, was worse than any flu I've ever had. But we recovered, and that's the most important thing.
100% recovered, but back to top form?
Not quite. Still quite fatigued, a little bit breathless, but then I am asthmatic, so that would be expected. But my husband has no underlying health conditions and is still a little bit breathless. The main symptom question that we had, so I snuck in a couple of questions on the text. One was related to my 3-year-old, who actually ended up in A&E, who was very poorly, which was obviously worrying for any parent, and not what we expected. Again, she has completely recovered, so I don't want this to be a scare story or anything like that, but her oxygen levels dropped to around 90, which again wasn't scary, but enough for us to have to take her to A&E, and they gave her some. They were amazing, and gave her some medication, and she's come through that. But obviously, not all children come through this completely symptom-free. So my first question was about what the likelihood is of vaccination for those younger age groups. First, I guess we've got primary school age child, but then what's the time length and what's the likelihood of vaccination below that?
Okay, quick one on the quickly the second question, if I may. I'm just looking at the clock a little bit.
Yeah, the second question, is about brain fog. We were the symptom that completely caught us by surprise, but we know anecdotally it's been happening to other people. We were just completely disorientated for about 2 weeks. Really struggled to know what day it was, and all I can describe it as is just kind of almost like an echo chamber in your head, and it was just really weird. And I was just wondering if this is a symptom that people are reporting now, or if this is just us.
Well, yeah, okay, couple of ones. Quick if you can, Chris.
I'll do my best.
But they're good ones, so basically the vaccine for the young'un and brain fog for a lot of people.
Sally, at the moment, there are no plans to vaccinate the real younger kiddies, the below 11-year-olds. But that may change. There is no reason why the vaccines aren't safe, effective, and would work in that age group. And in fact, in some countries, they have been approved. So watch this space. But the current judgment on the part of the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, is that the benefit that would be conferred by vaccinating those groups against the risk posed by coronavirus to them, since the levels of activity of the disease have been quite low in that group hitherto, and this has changed, and they may therefore change their stance, didn't at the time justify vaccination, but let's watch this space. Brain fog, very interesting. In fact, we actually interviewed a researcher, and we put the piece into 5 Live Science, which you can find on BBC Sounds, just on Sunday morning. So if you look up 5 Live Science, the latest episode on BBC Sounds, you will hear the interview. It's the second news story, quite close to the top of the programme. The individual we interviewed has actually done quite a lot of research on blood vessels and what the coronavirus does to blood vessels, including the smallest blood vessels in the body and those in the brain.
How interesting.
And what they're finding is that the virus attacks the lining of small blood vessels, and when it does so, it compromises that vessel a bit, at least temporarily. And since the brain has one of the densest networks of blood vessels of any organ in the body, it means that you drop the oxygen supply to bits of your brain tissue, and the consequence of that is that they don't work so fast and don't work so well. So part of this could be, in some people, that the brain becomes relatively oxygen starved, at least for a while, and that leads, as we all know, when people become short on oxygen, they get a bit confused, and it may be that that's a contributing factor. Yes, because what we know about it is that in most people, these things completely repair themselves, and the cells that get damaged get repaired and replaced, and everything goes back to normal. But at the acute height of the illness, you've got your lungs not working very well, so you're low on oxygen anyway, and if you compromise the lining of some blood vessels in some parts of the body, at least for a while, that compounds the problem and starves that tissue of a bit of oxygen, which can make it work less well, and that might be part and parcel. But on top of that, you've got an acute infection which is making you feel unwell, and as we all know, when you don't feel well, you can't think straight. So put all those things together, and that probably is contributing to the brain fog people experience.
Get well, Sally. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, really, I mean, it's the brain fog is a terrible thing. We're getting that message again and again and again and again. I know what I must ask you, Chris. We had Maureen on later on, who is 80. She should have had her vaccine in December. She's had 2 AstraZeneca jabs, but there are no AstraZeneca booster jabs, only Pfizer, and she feels that she is allergic to penicillin. That's what she said. We have a text saying, I'm allergic to penicillin. I had 2 AZ vaccines and have had a Pfizer booster, and I am fine. That's from Jackie. Can you just reassure anyone on that?
Yeah, right. So the trials that have been done have looked at what is the best thing to give off the back of 2 doses of vaccine to start with that gives the best, quickest and probably most robust protection as a booster. Regardless of whatever you had as your first course of vaccination, the Pfizer vaccine emerges as the best contender at the moment as a booster. So this is why current government policy is that Pfizer, or in some cases the Moderna vaccine, another RNA vaccine that works in a very similar way, are being used as the booster jab. There is no penicillin in these preparations, and the immune system is very selective about what it reacts to. So if you've had an allergy to one thing, it doesn't mean that's a risk factor for another in most circumstances. So you should be absolutely fine, and don't be alarmed if you're offered a Pfizer vaccine having not had Pfizer before, because that's the current policy and we know it works incredibly well.
There you go, Maureen. Hopefully you're still listening. That was for you. Adam's in Stoke. Hi, Adam. It's 9:56. I'm making everybody aware of the time. Adam, on you go.
Hello, Nicky. Love this show. Listen to you for years. I've got an extra hour.
Thank you very much indeed. That's the best waste of time I've ever heard. Anyway, carry on.
Thank you. I'm a 45-year-old, and I've had my second vaccine in June. And with evidence that the vaccine wanes over time, and the under 50s not being offered the booster jab, would it be better for me to catch COVID now rather than later when the vaccine protection is lower, say in maybe 8 months' time?
Some people are saying that this is actually the way it's going to be in future, Adam. Yes. We know that this virus is not going away. It's become what's called endemic, which means it's going to continuously circulate among humans. And immunity that we get to this family of viruses called coronaviruses is not long-lived. It's not like measles or rubella or mumps or chickenpox where you are immune for life. The immunity lasts between about 3 and 6 years on average after a bad bout of it, which means that the natural scheme of things is that you'll catch it, recover, become immune, become susceptible again, catch it, but probably trivially, boost your immunity, become immune, catch it again later, boost your immunity, and that cycle continues
6
through
years.
life.
But lots of people have had it
on a
within
cycle time of
6
between
months.
3 and 6 years for most members of the coronavirus family, but this one might be that cycle's going to be a bit shorter. Also, the vaccines don't confer natural immunity, they confer vaccine-induced immunity, which might be a bit more short-lived, which means we might see more reinfections, at least while things settle down, but then once they do settle down, it'll retreat into the background as the common cold, alongside 4 other coronaviruses that cause the common cold, and probably account for 5-10% of the common colds that people get in winter times under normal circumstances.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks very much for the kind words as well. Don't miss the news show, 9 to 11, Monday to Friday. So why are people getting it like twice a year sometimes, Chris?
At the moment, of course, it's a moving feast because the virus is moving, people's immunity isn't stable because they may have had a vaccine which is not going to confer natural protection from natural infection. It's going to produce a short-lived antibody response, a bit like we get against the flu. Left to its own devices, you would probably make a more robust immune response, but you might run the risk of being iller, and that would take slightly longer to decline before you caught it again. But that's probably the pattern we're going to see in the longer term, where we see surge in cases, a drop-off, surge in cases, a drop-off, a bit like we do with the flu.
But calmer waters in the spring. 15
That's
seconds.
what we're hoping for.
That's what JVT's hoping for. Is that what we're going to get?
I think so. I'm pretty optimistic.
Hey.
I'm pretty optimistic. I think we're on the path out of this now, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And you've not always said that over the last 18 months, so that's good. Chris Smith, thank you very much indeed.
Welcome. Have a nice day.
You too. Talk again. Thanks for all those fantastic questions. Naga is coming next. Not to be missed.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. This is Harvey Cook. The Chancellor says the UK will become the first net zero aligned financial centre, as he outlined how British businesses will be forced to explain how they intend to deliver on climate targets. Rishi Sunak, who's been speaking at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, said the requirement would come into force in 2023. He told delegates how the global financial system would be rewired.
We are going to move towards making it mandatory for firms to publish a clear, deliverable plan setting out how they will decarbonise and transition to net zero with an independent task force to define what's required.
The mother of a 4-year-old girl who was found alive in Australia 18 days after she disappeared says her family is whole again. Cleo Smith went missing from a family's tent in a remote part of the country last month. She was found in a room of a locked building in her hometown of Carnarvon. A 36-year-old man is being questioned by detectives. The Conservative MP Owen Paterson is being supported by allies in a bid to avoid suspension from Parliament for breaking lobbying rules. MPs will vote today on whether to uphold an independent rule. The amendments being put forward, which would lead to Mr Paterson's case being reconsidered, and a new committee set up to look at reforming the way members of Parliament are investigated. The senior Tory MP, Bernard Jenkins, admits it's not the best time.
This looks terrible. We've had a bad system for years and years and years. I just see this as an opportunity to fix it. We're not letting Owen Paterson off. We're not exonerating him. We're not condemning him. We're going to put his case in front of a proper judicial-style panel where there can be proper hearing.
A British woman has won a legal battle against Australia's so-called backpacker tax, which could have a knock-on effect for other people who want to work while travelling. Catherine Adey successfully argued she was discriminated against on the basis of her nationality while she was employed as a waitress in Sydney. Senior figures at Yorkshire Cricket Club are coming under increasing pressure over the handling of racism allegations made by their former player Azim Rafiq. A report, which hasn't been made public, upheld some of his claims, but some of the details have been leaked, alleging a senior player used a derogatory term referring to Rafiq's Pakistani heritage without being punished. Yorkshire's chairman, Roger Hutton, has been called to face Parliament's Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. The Conservative MP, Julian Knight, is its chair.
Here we are, sat around basically reading a report which frankly is almost jaw-dropping in the way in which it takes no responsibility for what is, quite frankly, gross and repellent racism.
And the average price of a home in the UK has risen above £250,000 for the first time. Nationwide's October statistics show the cost of a property has gone up by almost 10% compared with the same time last year. And that's the BBC News at 10:03.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Let's have a look at the weather now. We've got some bright or sunny spells across many parts of the UK, but still one or two mist and fog patches, particularly around East Anglia and the southeast of England, and also some showers to talk about. A few areas. So the first one is across the north of Scotland, where showers will continue to feed in here. Some of those could be a bit wintry over the higher ground. Showers also feeding into the north and west of Northern Ireland. Those will move their way a bit further south and eastward today. And showers also around the North Sea, which are pushing their way into northeast England, around Lincolnshire, and some of those just moving their way a bit further south and westward into the Midlands. The last area of showers is across West Wales and the southwest of England. Those will also continue that stream of showers for a northerly wind throughout this afternoon. Elsewhere, it will stay largely dry with those bright or sunny spells, but there is a rather brisk north and northwesterly wind. So temperatures on the thermometer might say about 6 to 12 degrees Celsius. Fact in the wind, it will feel colder than those temperatures suggest. Simon King, 5 Live Weather.
Europe's elite club competition.
The Champions League on 5 Live and 5 Live Sports Extra.
Ronaldo, 25 yards out, back into Bruno Fernandes, lovely flick, Ronaldo's in! Ronaldo equalises for Manchester United.
Later on tonight will be Anfield bound for Liverpool versus Atletico Madrid. Plus, updates from Manchester City against Club Brugge, the Champions League.
This is 5 Live. Listen on BBC Sounds.
The voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
Naga Manchetti. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Good morning to you. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of November. This morning, I want to talk about racism in cricket. The ECB is holding its own investigation into what happened to Azim Rafiq at Yorkshire. A leaked report says that colleagues calling him the P word was seen as, and I quote, good-natured banter, unquote. Loads of people on Rafiq's Twitter account say that there is a problem with racism in cricket at all levels. Is that your experience? Why don't you talk to me this morning about what you've seen? You can text 85058, you can call 08085 909 693, and of course you can tweet at BBC 5 Live. My guest after 11:30 is Paris Fury, Tyson Fury's other half, and a pretty impressive force in her own right. She has written a book about what life is like with the boxer and their 6 kids. And we're going to talk about a truly brilliant story from Australia. Some good news, I'm delighted to report. 4-year-old Cleo Smith, who was missing for 18 days, was rescued by police overnight. And you can listen to this clearly emotional police officer who helped find her.
I asked her what her name was. One of the guys jumped in front of me and picked her up, and I, I just wanted to be absolutely sure that, it certainly looked like Cleo. I wanted to be absolutely sure it was her, so I said, what's your name? And she didn't answer, and I said, what's your name? She didn't answer again, so I asked her a 3rd time, and then she looked at me and she said, my name's Cleo.
Simplest things, isn't it? Good story, that. We'll get more later. Plus, the role of big tech firms when it comes to combating climate change. And, of course, 12 o'clock, Prime Minister's Questions from midday. So we have so much to get through. I hope you can join me for the next 3 hours. Let's return to this main story then. There are calls for the whole of Yorkshire County Cricket Club to resign this morning. This is because of its handling of the investigation into the racist abuse that Azim Rafiq faced there. A leaked report says using the P word was regarded as friendly, good-natured banter. MPs on the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee have asked the club's chairman to appear before them to answer questions. I want to talk to you about your experience of racism in cricket this morning. Azim Rafiq has been retweeting many examples people have sent him from grassroots leagues, including children being called the P word. How's racism being tackled in cricket in your experience? Of course, you can text 85058. Now, the BBC Sports editor, Dan Rowan, is all over this and joins me now. Dan, morning to you.
Morning, Naga.
Morning. This has taken quite a while, hasn't it, to get to this point?
It really has, yes, because Rafiq, who played for Yorkshire in 2 spells between 2008 and 2018, he first made allegations of institutional racism at the club more than a year ago now. He said that it had left him close to taking his own life, in fact. Now, 7 of the 43 allegations were upheld in an independent report commissioned by Yorkshire, which found that he'd been a victim of racial harassment and bullying. That was a couple of months ago. The club apologised to him, but last week they also said that following their own internal investigation, they would not take any action against any player, employee or executive. Now, Rafiq said that was inconceivable. Yorkshire were already, it's worth noting, under scrutiny over how long this had been taking. They missed a deadline last month to send the full report to Rafiq. They said that they couldn't publish it for legal reasons. He has only a redacted version. There was concern over an apparent link between the chairman of the county and the law firm that had investigated these allegations. Key figures weren't interviewed, but the political pressure on Yorkshire, Naga, has really ramped up over the last couple of days after more details of the investigation have emerged, because as you said in your introduction, there was a leak and a claim on ESPN Cricinfo that the independent panel, which was appointed by Yorkshire and which includes a non-executive director of the club on it, had concluded
Hence
that
independent.
Indeed. I mean, of the 6 members, 5 are not connected to the club. One is a non-exec director, but it is an independent panel. It had concluded that a racially offensive term used repeatedly towards Rafiq about his Pakistani heritage by a current Yorkshire player was regarded as friendly banter, and that player was therefore cleared of wrongdoing. Now, that obviously sparked outrage and has intensified doubts about the whole process and the conclusion that the club was not institutionally racist, and you've referenced some of the criticism from politicians.
Am I wrong to be confused about why Azim Rafiq was given a redacted version?
The county says that they cannot give the full version for legal reasons. They believe they say they've received advice that it would leave them open to libel, potentially. However, details are coming out, as I've said, and there may be more to come because, and I'm sure you'll go on to ask about this, the DCMS Select Committee have summoned the chairman of Yorkshire, Roger Hutton, to explain himself. We've heard from Julian Knight, the chair of that DCMS committee, and his criticism. He said yesterday that he suggested the entire Yorkshire board should go, in fact, over what he called endemic racism. But crucially, there's parliamentary privilege at those hearings, and Azim Rafiq will be giving evidence, I understand, and so will Yorkshire's Director of Cricket and the Chief Executive and the Chairman. And perhaps Rafiq may feel that he should reveal exactly what is in that report and what he has alleged under that parliamentary privilege.
Well, ahead of that evidence being given, what do we expect to hear now from Yorkshire or the ECB? Because it all seems pretty quiet.
It is, certainly on Yorkshire's front. They've said nothing despite us asking them for comment yesterday. They did, as I said, some weeks ago apologise to the player for what he had suffered, but there's been no response to these most recent revelations. The ECB are conducting their own investigation, Naga, which will take several months, we understand, to complete, because they will now have to go through the entire process again and conduct their own interviews. They did release a statement yesterday saying that they're conscious of the toll that it is taking on Rafiq's well-being, and they vowed to be as quick as possible. We're sorry, they said, that this has not yet been resolved, but it's certainly under mounting pressure to act, and you saw politicians yesterday saying that they wanted the governing body to come down heavily on Yorkshire. What they can do remains to be seen. Perhaps they might say that Yorkshire can't host those lucrative international matches that they're handed. I mean, they are scheduled to host some, of course, next year. It's a very important venue for cricket internationally in this country. We've already seen some sponsors get nervous. We saw Emerald Publishing Group, who have the naming rights for Headingley, yesterday express their dismay. For example, Anchor Butter, another key sponsor this summer, shirt sponsor of Yorkshire, they say they're not renewing their deal as well, and commented on it yesterday, so that the pressure is certainly building on that county. A county which, as you may well know, Naga, over the years has been under some pressure to improve its record on diversity and how and its relationship with the communities in that part of the world, in Yorkshire, and lots of progress has been made, but it can't help feel that this is one of the gravest crises now in the club's 158-year history.
You know, Dan, if we take this outside the club, outside Yorkshire and its reputation, and you, as with your sports editor hat on, you know, for how many years we have spoken about racism in sport from the stands, from the spectators. What's different here, and this is why we're talking about grassroots leagues as well, is what's happening on the pitch, which didn't, you know, if you talk about football, it always kind of seems to go back to the stands, but what's concerning is why this is happening on the pitch during the game. What is it about cricket, grassroots level particularly, that is allowing this?
Well, that's something which I think Yorkshire have been very keen to address in recent years, and as I said, I think they have been credited with some progress. There was, I think, a perception that in some quarters that there was definitely a need for that, and that the legacy of the 70s and 80s had taken time to try and overcome. I mean, it's not unheard of in other sports. You'll recall some years ago allegations of racist language being used by footballers towards each other in English football. But I think what gives this such seriousness and gravity is the fact that, as you say, it does concern not abuse online or from the stands, disturbing and dreadful as that is, and of course we see that the battle against that continuing certainly in football, but that he is alleging that it was institutional from the club. And I think we have to remember, as I said earlier, that they have apologised to him for the racial harassment and bullying that he suffered. The big question that many are asking, therefore, is why then has no one been punished? And the player Rafiq himself, tweeted yesterday to express his dismay Over the last 14 months, he said, I've told both the Players' Union and the ECB that someone needs to show leadership, take this out of the club's hands. No one believed me, no one listened to me and left me all alone. Time for the full truth, he says. So I think his appearance in a couple of weeks in front of that committee could be very interesting indeed.
Very. Dan, as I said when I introduced you, you are all over this, and I know you'll continue to keep us updated. It's always good to talk to you.
Thanks,
Dan Rowan, our sports editor there. Dan was mentioning Julian Knight, who chairs the DCMS committee, which has asked the Yorkshire chairman to appear. And Julian Knight was talking to my colleague Rachel Burden on Breakfast just this morning.
Well, I've been across this for quite a few months because, as you can imagine, first of all, I'm a cricket lover myself, and I found this whole process deeply shaming, Yorkshire's lack of contrition and inability to do the right thing really does. It was a dreadful pull over the game. Some of the most egregious things that I've heard are that, as you say, the use of the word P and that being dismissed as banter, but also a degree of victim blaming, with the club equating Rafiq's using the phrase Zim for Zimbabwean with the P word. They are not the same, not in our context. So I found that a really quite disturbing approach. And finally, I come from a very simple viewpoint, really. If in a workplace someone was using the P word, frankly, I'd expect them to be fired. And anyone covering up or excusing this should stand down. That's exactly the same approach that I expect from Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
It's hard to believe how they could dismiss this. What is going on in the culture of a club like this? I presume we're not looking at a very diverse board. I presume we are, mostly looking at older white men, are we, running this and coming to these conclusions?
Well, look, Yorkshire has a long history of problems with racism, going right back to the 1980s with the abuse that the great Viv Richards suffered at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. And actually, in the last 48 hours, I've been approached by former cricketers from across the country to say that the one place that they have difficulties with is at Yorkshire. And it goes against the current.
Why do you think that is? What's going on there?
Well, the fact that the board has not taken the action that it ought to have done in this instance is an indication there is a cultural issue. When you look down the road at Leicestershire, for instance, you find a fantastically diverse management, but also a management which engages enormously with the minority communities in Leicestershire. And yet in Yorkshire we have the P word being dismissed as banter. It's just not good enough.
No, it's not good enough. Monty Panesar, a name you will all know, former England spinner, joins me now. Monty, morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
No, thank you for talking to me. Listen, you've heard there what was being said. From Julian Knight. You heard Dan Rowan and I discuss what's going on in cricket. Just give me your overview as this story unfolds.
Yeah, look, I think Yorkshire have shown insufficient concern over, Azim Rafiq sort of bullying and racial, allegations, and especially, when they delayed the report and then what's come out, out of the report. I think there's a clear sort of lack of maybe understanding, or there's a complex issue in do they really understand that the using the word P is actually a racist term?
How hard? I'm sorry, I don't understand why that's hard to understand.
Well, because in Yorkshire they've had that they've had that sort of culturally where maybe they just think that can be used as banter, but it's not. Like we all know that if you're
Monty,
in any other sort of workplace.
Sorry to interrupt, right? And I'm someone who very rarely follows smaller cricket games. I follow the big games, right? I love a big sporting occasion. I went to Leeds University 20 years ago, admittedly. More than that, 25 years ago. 25 years ago when I was in Leeds, the people around me knew the P word was not acceptable. I don't understand, genuinely, how in a sporting arena it can be thought that word is acceptable when the rest of a city, and this is just Leeds, knows it isn't.
Well, it's evident that that Yorkshire County Cricket Club are not taking these allegations seriously, and if there must be some members of players and employees who have kind of used it, and they're trying to either cover them up, or they've got themselves into even bigger trouble, and now the government are going to get involved, and they want transparency. And I don't know why Yorkshire County Cricket Club are not just being transparent and just being honest and open. In fact, what's in that report? Why does it have to be a secret? So there obviously are clear issues with Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and I think culturally in that region, the lack of understanding with diversity and inclusiveness is a huge issue in Yorkshire.
When you, through all levels that you've played, obviously you've played right up to international level, was it kind of known that area, that Yorkshire was problematic like that?
Well, I think when I had Michael Vaughan as my captain, who was from Yorkshire, and he kind of, embraced all the people that were involved in that England team. And the metaphor was that if Yorkshire cricket is strong, England cricket is strong. That was in terms of cricket. Now, if we talk about, in terms of is Yorkshire slightly more, let's say, less tolerant to other sort of cultural, people from other societies, that was always talked about amongst, county cricket. We've had numerous occasions where people have felt that, going to Yorkshire, you kind of feel like you're misunderstood. There's been several stories about other members who they feel that, it's a bit of a hostile environment when they play against Yorkshire. And this has gone many, many years. So, like we all know, overt racism existed in the 80s and the 90s, and especially, up north. And I do believe that going forward, Yorkshire County Cricket Club should, have a cultural camp where through storytelling, through guided conversation, they need to know the understanding of respect, empathy and belonging and inclusiveness. What does that really mean? And I think, deeper conversations need to be taking place amongst that club.
How do you think, because cricket, I mean, we've been talking in our morning meeting today, cricket, you look around and there are lots of Asian kids playing cricket. At grassroots levels, and for me, I always look at the cricket pitch and see it just looking completely diverse when I, drive past a cricket pitch, whatever. How do you think Asian communities, Asian children, and their parents actually will be feeling today?
Yeah, look, they've always been an issue, isn't there? There was a recent stat come out in amateur cricket. We've seen over 30 to 40% of people playing at club level, and only 3 or 4% coming through the areas. And and I think over 60% of British Asians are living in urban areas. So, that's going to be an issue for them to think that, is cricket for us? Isn't it for us? And we've seen the ECB, they've committed to saying that by 2024, we want over 200 centres, urban centres around these areas to give more opportunity to the South Asian community. But then, why aren't Yorkshire County Cricket Club then, helping the ECB when there's a racial issue? They need to be rather than making everything more complicated, they need to work with the ECB and say, look, maybe we've got it wrong. Just put your hand up and say, look, we don't have the understanding of certain terms, or maybe we thought it was under banter, because there's going to be bigger sponsors. Tetley, haven't decided if they're going to pull out, who've been sponsoring Yorkshire for decades. And, we've seen other sponsors, demanding answers, because financially this could be a huge consequence for Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
Yeah, hit clubs where it hurts, in the wallet. I will ask you this, and I will preface it by saying I have. Has anyone called you the P word whilst you've been playing?
When I played for England and all my counties, and even in the county circuit, no one called me the P word. And if they, if I ever experienced that, I would have definitely called them up upon that. But no one ever did that to me. So maybe I was probably slightly the fortunate cases. But with Azim Rafiq, he's repeatedly been known as that. They kept on just referring to him as that, and he was into tears. He wanted to go to suicide thoughts. So his own experience, is something that he should tell everyone. He should, and he probably will, and he'll give the the backing from the Parliament to say, give us the full details of your experience, because we're here to support you. And I think that's the right thing to do by the government.
How much value is, and it's something Rachel brought up earlier with Julian Knight about diversity on boards. Is it worth kind of put the English Cricket Board putting a minority candidate up for the next chairman. For example, I don't know, Wasim Khan, former Pakistan and Leicestershire managing director.
Yeah, that could be a really good option because, you know, you need sometimes an understanding of someone who can actually, you know, under the South Asian culture and someone they can refer to, you know, the British Asian amongst that region could say, well, yeah, we can go to Wasim Khan and talk about whatever we want to because maybe they feel a bit more comfortable. And that could be, you know, going forward, you know, Wasim Khan could be a good appointment, you know, for Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
Monty, will you stay with me? I've got Taj Butt, who's the secretary of Great Horton Church Cricket Club in Bradford, who worked at Headingley for the Yorkshire Cricket Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the Yorkshire County Cricket Club, for 4 years, and he did that up until 2017. Taj, morning to you.
Good morning, Naga.
Morning. What do you make of this?
Well, to be honest, this has been going on for over a year, as you know, since Azim first made his allegations. And to be honest, when he made his allegations, it didn't really come as a surprise to most of us, people involved in a game of cricket or any other sport. If you, or having said that, for that matter, in a work employment where you work, and because a lot of the experience that Azim has had, you know, most people actually have that on a regular basis. If you're part of an organisation, a really white organisation, and you know what a lot of people refer to as banter, name calling, and all that sort of thing, that actually happens. And a lot of people you're expected to keep quiet and put up with it.
Well, Taj, let me counter that with you, because I've worked for many large organisations, and over the years I've been a journalist for 25 years, and I have seen a change, particularly, say, in the last 5 years, about people being more aware of the language they use, not just regarding race, regarding all sorts of subjects. Why has that not transcended into sport?
Well, that was one of the things that really surprised me when I first joined the club, and I was based at Headingley Stadium, and although I wasn't in contact with the players and the coaches, the playing side of it, but it was just the culture within the organisation. Now, every organisation has its own culture, and the fact that we're talking about cricket here, and we as South Asian communities, we've been part of Yorkshire cricket for over 50 years. So, you know, we particularly in some of the West Yorkshire areas and so on. So it's not as if we're new to the game. We're as passionate as anybody. And we've been playing. We have clubs, we have leagues, coaches, umpires, all that sort of thing. So we're very much part of the game here. So when I went to Headingley, I expected to see some representation within the game, or at least an understanding of the South Asian communities, and particularly the cricket side of it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The whole culture of the place itself, you know, the stereotypes, the name.
Was it deliberate?
Things.
Was it deliberate?
I think it was. I think it's just the people that within the organisation, you know, the appointments that will be made, that you tend to appoint people that are very much like yourselves, and a lot of the people were there. There were sort of young, laddish type people, and that drinking culture that existed within the organisation, and that came out, you know, unfortunately, negatively for people like Azim Rafiq who were impacted.
Do you know what? You know what happens, and Monty, I wonder if you'll be able to join in on this. And Taj, talk to me about this. And it's something that I didn't think I'd hear ever in the modern day. When my parents came to this country in the very early 70s, English people, white people couldn't pronounce their names, so they changed their names to English-sounding names. And this is still happening, Taj.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that was one of the first things that I came across when I actually started working. The only other person of colour working at the stadium was an African gentleman who obviously had a name that people couldn't pronounce, so they gave him the name Steve, which, again, nobody saw anything wrong with that. And in fact, that continued even to a point where a world-class player like Chateshwar Pujara, when he came to join a player as overseas player, because his name was difficult to pronounce, he was referred to as Steve. And again, that was just part of the banter that existed. And that's, again, you know, people didn't see that as they were doing nothing wrong. They thought he was part of the team, and you know, that's the name they'd given him.
Monty, did that ever happen to you?
Well, you know, my actually real name is Matsudan, and I remember when I was, you know, playing for Bedfordshire under 12s, everyone found it difficult to pronounce my name. So I already had a nickname that my auntie gave me, was Monty. So I kind of just told everyone, yeah, you can call me Monty. And then from there, I think my name everyone refers to is Monty Panasa, which you're absolutely right. It's an English name with a Sikh surname. So it is very common, I think, because people probably find it easier to accept in society by having an English name. And and pronunciation sometimes can be quite difficult if you have a long name as well. So we've seen entrepreneurs, we've seen a lot of, wealthy business people around, or presenters as well, and everyone, having an English first name.
There's a difference, though, isn't there, between, like, say your full name is Alexandra, and someone calls you Alex, a shortening of it, which is what happened with your name. I'm extrapolating, Monty, to say being called, I don't know, Suresh, and then being called Steve instead.
Yeah, there is a big difference because, Steve basically remains Steve Naive. That's the term when you're calling someone Steve. So if there is that indirect, like you call it, you're degrading someone by having that sort of name, then yeah, it is. That is an issue, and that's something that I think is not good. It's again, we call it backroom racism, possibly, where you're trying to think that the British Asian is naive, as such, by calling him Steve. That kind of stuff, yeah, is not acceptable, and I thoroughly agree, with you there on that point. And having these sort of conversations hopefully will give coaches, governing bodies, organisations, to actually think again about, what is termed right, what is not appropriate. And in football, we have kick it out, we have show racism, the red card, which I'm an ambassador of. But in cricket, we don't have like a charitable, organisation like that. So that could be another step for cricket to work on. Possibly the PCA to get involved, and at the start of each year, the PCA go to every counties to give them education on certain areas. I think players should be doing a questionnaire on racial discrimination and get a better understanding of what is termed right and what is wrong.
Can I get a thought? I want a couple more thoughts on both of you. Now, we're getting quite a lot of texts in along this vein, and Taj and Monty, I wonder if you can just explain this to Susie and the others who are texting in. Susie says, I don't see anything wrong with saying the P word. It's short for Pakistani, in the same way as Brit is short for British, is it not?
Absolutely not. No, it's quite clearly offensive, and those people who've been at the receiving end of it, this is the term that's been used to sort of abuse us over the years, and it's never been acceptable, and it isn't acceptable now at all, and it's not in no way is an abbreviation, and I think it's quite insulting for someone to actually even say something like that in this day and age.
Monty?
Yeah, look, I think that the P word or the N word is completely unacceptable. It's a racial term, and in cricket we have other sort of terms like the Australians call the English Poms, or we call them Aussies or Kiwis. Now that is perfectly, I think, acceptable. That comes under the banter bracket. But other words, which are racial, then that's something that understanding, I think, still isn't there yet, and I think more kind of work needs to be done for people to have a firm understanding. And if they say it, then yeah, there is consequence for that. If in a corporate world, you probably get the sack. So if in cricket, these kind of words cannot be used, and if they got enough evidence, if the evidence is strong enough, we may see potential resignations and sackings at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, depending on the investigation that the ECB do.
Question to you both. Monty, yes or no, do you think the whole Yorkshire board should resign?
Well, I think it depends on evidence, to be honest. You can't just, it's got to be fair to all parties and thoroughly investigated. So, the ECB, the employment judge and the employment tribunal, they will have to make that decision.
Well, I think quite clearly the people who actually treated Azim Rafiq the way they did, they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it for a start, whether the players, coaches, or whatever. And we know for a fact that there are other people involved, like the people who actually Azim Rafiq first went to. That included the chief executive, the chairman, and also some members of the board. And unfortunately, that included people from our own community as well. And we were talking about board representation earlier. We do have representation from our community on the board, and one of the first people Azim Rafiq went to was an Asian member of the board, and unfortunately he totally ignored Azim Rafiq, and what he had to say. And this is one of the things. I think that's what the problem of Yorkshire cricket as it exists now. They do appoint people in some of the positions, but unfortunately they're only willing to appoint those people who are not willing to speak out. And particularly, we've seen the people from within the organisation have been so quiet and not defended some of the things that Azim Rafiq has had to go through. And as a result of that, and some of that suffering that Azim Rafiq has been as a result of some of the people from our own community, as well as some of the other senior people on the board as well.
Taj, good to talk to you. Taj Butt, Secretary of the Great Horton Church Cricket Club in Bradford. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Monty Panesar, of course, former England spinner, international. Thank you very much as well for your time with us this morning. I need to say, I was talking to Dan Rowan, our sports editor, earlier. We were talking about the DCMS committee hearing that is expected. We now know that this on the Yorkshire racism crisis is going to be held on November the 16th, so in 13 days. Azim Rafiq will give evidence in person along with senior Yorkshire officials. Chairman Roger Hutton, CEO Mark Arthur and Director of Cricket Martin Moxon have also been called. So that's on the 16th of November. And thank you very much for getting in touch as well. John in York has said, whoever texted in saying that using the P word was okay because it is just a short-term version of Pakistani should take a long, hard look at themselves. The term is only ever used in an offensive way. It's 10:35. We need to get an update on what's happening in the news. Of course, COP26 got underway at the weekend, just before on Sunday. Alison Hughes has the latest. Morning, Alison.
Morning, that's right. And companies in the UK will be forced to deliver on climate targets. Tough new rules have been announced by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. He says it's time to rewire the global financial system. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam says he's worried about the growing number of people dying from COVID. He's been answering your questions on 5 Live and says it's time to blow the final whistle on the pandemic just yet. Police say a 4-year-old girl missing for 18 days in a remote part of Western Australia has been found alive and well in a locked house. Cleo Smith disappeared from a campsite last month. A man has been arrested. The average price of a home in the UK has risen above £250,000 for the first time. Figures from Nationwide show the cost of a property has gone up by almost 10% compared with the same time last year.
Alison, thanks so much. Hugh Ferris is all across the sport, all over it. Hugh, and you're going to pick up on this subject we spent the first half hour of this programme discussing.
Yeah, that's right. Just to reflect on some of what you've been talking about with some of your guests this morning, Naga, the head of the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee says Azim Rafiq will have a chance to tell his story and put his allegations of institutional racism levelled against Yorkshire out in the public domain. They have invited him to give evidence at a hearing on the 16th of November, along with senior Yorkshire officials, as you mentioned, Naga, just moments ago, Chairman Roger Hutton, CEO Mark Arthur, and Martin Moxon, who's the Director of Cricket at Yorkshire. It follows part of an independent panel's report into Rafiq's accusations being leaked, in which it claimed that the use of a racially offensive word was banter. And Julian Knight MP says the ECB's own investigation could lead to Yorkshire being prevented from hosting international cricket in the future. He has also called on the Yorkshire board to resign.
If in a workplace someone was using the P word, frankly, I'd expect them to be fired. And anyone covering up or excusing this should stand down. That's exactly the same approach that I expect from Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
Next to the T20 World Cup and Scotland's search for their first win of the Super 12 stage, it'll be tough in any of their remaining 3 games. This morning's is against New Zealand. Here's Dan Norcross.
Yeah, it's 53 for 3. We're halfway through the 7th over and out, and New Zealand got off to a flyer. Safian Sharif picked up 2 in 2, including the prize wicket of Kane Williamson. Little feather down the leg side. He went for a duck. Mitchell for 13. Devon Conway, the dangerous Devon Conway, has just been out looking to reverse sweep the first ball after the power play from Watt. So 52 for 3 after 6.5 overs. Martin Guptill going well on 29, but New Zealand, Scotland rather, have really fought their way back into this game, and there's pressure on New Zealand, who have to win this if they're going to keep the destiny of the title in their hands.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. Part of the commentary team on 5 Live Sports Extra for coverage from Dubai right now. Meanwhile, the Australia batter Will Pucovski is likely to miss the first Ashes test against England as he recovers from concussion symptoms. Pucovski took a blow to the head while training with his state team, Victoria, experiencing symptoms for the 10th time in his career. The BBC's Guillaume Balaguer says that Unai Emery was interested in the Newcastle job but will turn it down because of what he sees as a lack of strategy from the club's new owners. The Villarreal boss was Newcastle's first choice. They wanted him in place in time for the weekend. Tonight on 5 Live Sport, there's commentary from the Champions League of Liverpool against Atletico Madrid, coverage too of Manchester City's home game against Bruges. At snooker's English Open in Milton Keynes, John Higgins beat Oliver Lyons by 4 frames to 0 to reach the second round, and he says he punished his opponent's errors.
He missed a few easy ones when he was in about the balls ready to take control of the frames, and I managed to just get and punish him like nearly every time, which is tough for him to take, but no, I was delighted to do it.
And the Las Vegas Raiders have released their wide receiver Henry Ruggs after police said they'll charge the NFL player with drink driving resulting in death. He was arrested following his involvement in a crash in the city in the early hours of Tuesday. Ruggs was a first-round draft pick, selected number 12 overall back in 2020. That's the latest from BBC Sport.
BBC Sounds.
I want to just visualise it and describe the feeling before the race and as you cross that line. What did it feel being in that massive stadium in London?
Don't let life get in the way of your favourite podcast. Just connect your smartphone to your car stereo via Bluetooth or cable, and you'll never be left on a cliffhanger again.
Like, it was incredible just being able to walk in that stadium and have the whole nation behind you.
Music, radio, podcasts.
Listen to the BBC Sounds app everywhere you go.
BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK. Naga Manchetti. Listen live, pause, rewind and discover with the BBC Sounds app.
Morning to you. 20 minutes to 11 is the time. Keep your experiences, your thoughts about racism in cricket, particularly at grassroots level, coming in. Text 85058. You can call 08085 909 693. And, of course, tweet at BBC 5 Live. We'll get the conversation going again later in this programme. Also, after 11 o'clock, we're talking about the role of big tech when it comes to tackling climate change. Also, Paris Fury, the other half of the boxer Tyson Fury, is going to talk to me about life and her observations from all points of view, actually. I'm really looking forward to that conversation with her a little later. Want to talk about this. Allies of the Conservative former government minister Owen Paterson are trying to stop him from being suspended from Parliament. Mr Paterson, who is paid more than £100,000 a year as a consultant for 2 companies, was found by the parliamentary watchdog to have repeatedly broken lobbying rules. The Cross-Party Standards Committee has recommended a 30-day suspension. MPs will be able to table amendments in the Commons calling for his case to be reviewed and for the entire system of standards to be changed. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth is going to tell us exactly what they're asking for. Alex, morning to you. Good morning. Shall we start from the beginning, which is always a good place to start, in the words of Julie Andrews? How did this all begin?
Yeah, I mean, this is really complicated, and it sounds like it's really heavy on process, but there's some quite important principle behind it as well. So I think you're completely right. Let's go from the beginning. So Owen Paterson is a long-standing Conservative MP. He used to be a minister. Now, there was an investigation carried out by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, and that found that he had broken the rules which are meant to govern the way that MPs behave. That found that he'd used his position as an MP to benefit 2 companies that paid him as a consultant. Now, the committee, which is made up of MPs, which looks after standards, the Standards Committee, they decided he should be suspended from the Commons for 30 days for breaking those rules. Now, today, all MPs in the House of Commons are meant to vote on that. And normally what happens is that just gets nodded through. So when the Standards Committee comes up with an idea for a suspension for an MP or something similar, then normally all the other MPs just go, OK, yeah, that gets nodded through. But today that's not going to happen, because what's happening is allies of Owen Paterson say that he's been treated unfairly in this process, that he didn't have enough of a say, that he wasn't allowed to have witnesses properly interviewed. And what they're saying is this isn't just about Owen Paterson's case, there's a bigger problem. And so they want to change this system for standards, the way that standards that MPs are meant to stick to are governed. And they want a whole new committee set up to take a look at this and Owen Paterson's suspension to be paused. Now, as you can imagine, that's provoked quite a response from people like Labour, not least, who are saying this is completely unfair and will just really undermine trust in politics.
OK, what's Owen Paterson saying?
Well, his argument throughout is exactly what his allies are now making, that he wasn't really given a fair say throughout this process, and that the process isn't fair to MPs because they don't get to, put their witnesses forward or to argue their case in the way that you might do in a court of law, and that's why the system needs to be looked at again. So what's going to happen today is that Owen Paterson's allies, who want the system revisited, they're going to try and force a vote in the House of Commons on it, and we understand there are quite a lot of Conservative MPs who are going to back that vote, and what they're saying is that we should look again at the way this whole system works. But, like I say, they are going to run into an awful lot of opposition. There are some nerves among the Conservative Party as well that this is just not a good look, and Labour and the Liberal Democrats have come down really hard on this and said that, the whole reason this system was put in place was to make sure that MPs stick to standards, particularly in the wake of some quite big scandals, remember expenses and that kind of thing. And they're saying that this would just undermine trust in the system if you try and rip up the rules halfway through an inquiry, halfway through an investigation, then it just would make not just the MPs in the House of Commons look bad, but the whole of Parliament. It would really undermine public trust in it. So expect a pretty big row about all of this in the Commons this morning. And like I say, while it sounds quite technical, the reason all this matters is because it does come down to that issue of how the public can be sure that their MPs are held to the rules.
OK. Lindsay Hoyle, Speaker of the House of Commons, he always has something to say.
Yeah, and it's going to be up to him today. So this is where the process really kicks in. So basically, the motion, this is like typical Parliament speak, but the motion that's being put forward is that Owen Paterson should be suspended for 30 days. Now, Owen Paterson's allies are trying to amend that, so change that to say, hold on, this process should be paused and we should look again at it all. So it's going to be up to Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the man that looks after the way things run, to decide whether or not there's going to be a vote on that second bit. So whether or not the people that are pushing for Owen Paterson's suspension to be put on hold and for the system to be revisited, whether or not they get a vote on that will be up to Lindsay Hoyle. So that's going to be the first crucial step, and then it'll be eyes on that vote if it does happen, what happens with that, who supports this idea, who doesn't, and what the reaction is from the opposition parties on the other side as well. So there's going to be quite a lot happening in the Commons, and we expect all that to happen just after Prime Minister's questions, which happens at lunchtime. And you can also expect this probably, I think, to come up during Prime Minister's questions, so it'll be interesting to hear what the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has to say about it all.
The thing is, when something like this happens, Alex, one of the questions that gets asked is, surely MPs should be held to certain standards and transparency, and any move to kind of change these rules undermines that. Isn't that kind of what the main opposition voice to this is?
Yeah, well, that's the crux of this argument. So that's really what it boils down to. So there's the argument over Owen Paterson and his specific case, and he has been found by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner to have broken the rules. That report has been signed off by a cross-party group of MPs, including Conservatives who sit on the Standards Committee. They say, yep, we agree, he's broken the rules, he should be suspended. So you can argue the rights and wrongs of that case, where Owen Paterson says, I don't think I had a fair shout. The much bigger argument that's going on here is that argument about the way MPs are held to account, the way that their behaviour is checked and governed. And the friends and allies of Owen Paterson say this system's been flawed for a long time, it's been stacked against MPs. This is like the straw that's broken the camel's back, if you like. Now we want the system changed. Labour and the Liberal Democrats and some Conservative MPs as well, it's worth saying, are saying that is completely unfair. This system is in place to make sure that rules are properly held up, that MPs are held up to standards and held accountable, and to change it now in the middle of a case would be really damaging to Parliament and to MPs as well. So that's the argument I think we're going to hear play out in the House of Commons today.
OK, we will talk about it again, no doubt. Alex, thanks so much for taking us through all that. Today is a day to bring you lots and lots of information, and COVID obviously has not gone away, and one of the stars of the press conferences, of course, in the early days, remember those, when that used to be one of the highlights of the day, was England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam. Now, 5 Live Breakfast and BBC Breakfast, TV Breakfast, did a joint interview with Jonathan Van Tam and took your questions on the COVID pandemic. So Rachel Burden and Sally Nugent joined forces and started talking to him, and he began by talking about his concern about the rising number of cases.
The rates are still very high at the moment. They are higher than in most of Europe, and we are running quite hot. I think that's the right expression. And of course it's of concern to scientists that we are running this hot this early in the autumn season. And so from that perspective, I'm afraid it's caution followed by caution, and we need to watch these data very carefully indeed over the next days and weeks.
Let's talk about science, and certainly one of the UK's top scientists, Sir Jeremy Farrar, who has just announced he's going to be standing down from SAGE. What's your reaction to his departure, and is there a suggestion that some scientists at SAGE feel that government ministers perhaps aren't listening to them at the moment?
Yeah, so I've read the Sky News report on Sir Jeremy's resignation, and I think it's very clear he felt that a lot of the information that the government needed to have from scientists has now been given, and he recognised the need that he had to really refocus on his work at the Wellcome Trust. But, you know, it's just a tribute that to Sir Jeremy and to so many other scientists that they have supported us so hard and for so long and given such invaluable independent advice. So I don't think I read any more signal in the fact that in that than you know, Sir Jeremy recognised that most of the advice had been given and he really needed to focus back on the Wellcome Trust.
But we have heard suggestions that he's not the only scientist who perhaps feels that the government is not following their advice at the moment. Can you say with absolute confidence that the government is listening to everything that the scientists are putting to them at the moment?
The government has to listen to scientists, it has to listen to all sorts of advice from all other places, and it has to make really very difficult decisions about what the best course of action is. Science is really important, so is the economy, so is the functioning of society. So these are just tricky decisions. There are no easy choices left, and frankly there haven't been for a couple of years now.
Well, that's interesting. So we've moved from being in a position where we are following the science to following other considerations as well alongside with that. Let's move on to some of our questions from listeners and viewers in that case. And we're going to hear, first of all, from Darren in Kent. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning, Darren. What would you like to ask Professor Van Tam?
Good morning. Being a part-time commuter, I've noticed fewer people gradually wearing face masks on public transport. Does the professor think that the wearing of face masks should become mandatory, and as cases rise as winter approaches?
On face coverings, and you know, face masks are face coverings, but people wear all sorts of things as face coverings. I think the evidence over the period of the pandemic has become stronger that they are useful, but they are probably most useful when used in combination with other things. And we should be clear that there is probably some small personal protection effect, but the main effect is probably in protecting other people.
So that was Jonathan Van Tam talking a little earlier to Rachel Burden and Sally Nugent. Of course, Jonathan Van Tam being England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, taking your questions about COVID and what is happening next. I think he also said that springtime is where he sees things calming down, becoming more calm. It is exactly 8 minutes to 11. Show jumping. Let it not be said we don't cover all sorts of subjects on this programme. Show jumping could reportedly be dropped from the modern pentathlon at the Olympics. So it's one of 5 disciplines in the event, hence pentathlon. The others are fencing, swimming, shooting and running. Should the horses stay? Wow. All of this comes, of course, after that big row at the Tokyo Olympics. One horse refused to jump and then was punched by a German coach. It got quite ugly. Now, Kate Allenby competed in the modern pentathlon twice in the Olympics and won bronze at Sydney and joins me now. Kate, morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning. So at the moment, this is a suggestion. Why do you think it's gone as far as being suggested now?
Well, it's really interesting. I was just before I came live on the show. Thank you for having me on. I read an article that was in Keep this morning where the Vice President of the UIPM, Joel Bouzou, has confirmed that they've been thinking about this since 2018, which means it's been a total secret. No consultation has taken place. Nobody has spoken to any of the athletes and the people involved in the sport, and they're making decisions. The International Federation are making decisions of enormous proportions. So it's outrageous.
Why? Why is it outrageous? I understand why you're outraged, but why the horses? Why are the show jumping being dropped?
The the sport was dreamt up by Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who's the founder of the ancient Olympic Games, and the sport tees off every single area of Olympic sport. It's man v opponent, man v water, man v himself in the shooting, controlling himself, and the endurance of the running, and man v man, not v animal, that's at the time, man with animal. And if you take out the riding, you haven't got pentathlon. What sport have you got? And where does it sit?
Haven't they suggested cycling?
Do you know? I think that's a big smokescreen. I don't think that's true. That came from an article that was published back in the summer, I think, and I don't think it is going to be cycling.
What do you think it could be?
You know what? It's a good question. What is pentathlon if it hasn't got riding? Because it's based on the ideals of the Olympic movement, and it's based on the soldier who's the messenger and who rides a horse. You know, you can't suddenly chuck another sport in there because it's not pentathlon, and it can't sit in the Olympic movement like that. And so we're really terrified that, you know, pentathlon's busy trotting its way out of the Olympics.
What would be the impact of that?
Massive. You know, the International Federation have devalued the riding since 1994. They took riding out of the semi-finals to make it in major championships, which gave the messaging to the athletes that riding is less important. You have to be a world-class tetrathlete to make a final at a world championships. And so the athletes go away going, well, I want to make the final, so I'll go and make myself a world-class tetrathlete, and then get to the final and go, I hope I get round the ride. And that's the mentality that has come from those rule changes. And so the International Federation have chipped and chipped and chipped and chipped. And the athletes ride to the rules. And what you saw in Tokyo is the impact of chipping away at those rules and changing them and causing those problems. But equally, you've got to look at those riders. There are good riders out there. Look at Kate French, who won the gold medal. She's been riding since she was very, very young, and learned her trade through the Pony Club, which is brilliant. But I think the real success story, look at Joe Chung, who only started riding in his teen years when he started at school. In 10 years he's come through not being a rider at all and has reached the standard because of the sport in the UK. They've invested in him and they've supported his riding pathway so that he's able and competent to compete at that level, whereas other nations haven't done that because they play to the rules.
Let me put a couple of the other side to you, shall we? Someone's texted saying, drop the horses, the most sensible idea yet. The standard of riding was appalling from most. I ride and work with horses, and it's awful to watch. There's also the complaint, and justifiable complaint, I'm sure you'll agree, about when the coach punched a horse, and, you know, casting doubt over the kind of standards of care over the animals. Do you want to talk to me about both those points?
Yeah, so let's pick up on the first point, which was, you know, riding shouldn't be in because they're not good enough. Well, I think I've teed that one off in what I've already said to you about how the International Federation have changed the rules to devalue the riding. Therefore, the athletes are not getting in the saddle enough. Coming round to your second point, which was the punch. Let's call it a thump, because a punch gives a very, very different image to a thump. Let's talk about that in the first instance.
Tell me the difference of it. And I have ridden horses, but I have no idea about the difference between a punch and a thump.
So a punch conjures up all sorts of images from you'd get in a pub of somebody swinging at somebody. That's not what happened, is it?
She punched the horse, didn't she?
If it's you're talking about somebody anyway, listen, let's go back to the International Federation and talk about their chipping away at the rules and how they've changed the importance of the riding, and so the athletes haven't spent time in the saddle.
Okay, and I completely accept that one part, but Kate, you'd also have to understand that people are watching, people are hearing that a coach has punched a horse, whether it be a thump or a punch. They've physically abused a horse. What is happening?
Yeah. So let's look at take that one incident, and you're really jumping from that one incident to chucking the sport out of the Olympics entirely. You know, they didn't cut the 100 metres after Ben Johnson tested positive, did they?
No. but this is about the approach to whether or not there is, I don't know, is there too much pressure in there? Is there not? Is the way the horses are being trained and looked after not good enough? And doesn't this all contribute to the idea? It's not the one thing that's going to eliminate horse riding from this event.
So let's look at the horse welfare protocols that the UIPM have put into place and the safety protocols that they put into place for the athletes. Earlier this year, a 13-year-old athlete qualified for a final. Obviously, she was a world-class tetrathlete, as we said, but at 13, at her age, height, size, putting her on a competition, or allowing her to get on a 16-hand competition horse without a competition licence. You know, that's the UIPM not looking after the welfare of their athletes, and that's not looking after the welfare of the horses, because that's fundamentally not safe. And that poor 13-year-old girl got on a horse, and she spent a lot of her 13 years swimming, running, shooting, fencing. Clearly hasn't spent enough time riding because she spent time doing the other sports. And that's fundamentally not safe. You can't have that as a scenario, and yet it happened. This is a federation who are not standing up for what they're supposed to be doing at the very basics of the sport, and putting the athletes and riders and horses in the wrong position.
Really interesting talking to you, Kate.
They have to be held to account. They have to be held to account.
Kate, thanks so much for spending time with me, talking me through this. Kate Allenby there, of course, who competed in the modern pentathlon twice in the Olympics and won bronze at Sydney. We will talk about this much more later on.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 11 o'clock. This is Harvey Cook. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced British firms will, within the next 2 years, be forced to set out how they intend to decarbonise. Speaking at the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, Mr Sunak said he wanted the UK to become the world's first net zero aligned financial centre. Sam Alves from the think tank The Green Alliance said the strategy was world leading, but there were still lots of unanswered questions about it.
We don't yet have regulation that will say that net zero plan has to reach a certain date. We don't have the regulation that says actually it can only go into certain investments. This is still allowing people to invest in fossil fuels and to use fossil fuels over the next few years, but it does say how you have to move away from them. In terms of the policing, yeah, that's another gap that we need to fill.
England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam says he's worried about the growing number of people dying from COVID-19. Professor Van Tam warned there were likely to be hard months to come. He said it was vital that people got their booster vaccines.
My worry is that deaths are increasing, and that shows that the infection is now starting to penetrate into those older age groups. If you are called for your booster, if you are called for your flu vaccine, please go and get them. This could be really very important this winter. It is not the time to be complacent.
A 4-year-old girl who went missing in Australia more than a fortnight ago has been found alive and well. Cleo Smith disappeared from a tent she was sleeping in with her family on a remote campsite. A man's being questioned after she was discovered in a locked house in her hometown of Carnarvon. The former Yorkshire Cricket Club player Asim Rafiq has been invited by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee to give evidence about the racism he said he was subjected to at Headingley. It's been reported that an investigation by the club, which has not been made public, concluded that a senior player used a derogatory term about Mr Rafiq's Pakistani heritage without being punished. Our sports editor Dan Rowan says the pressure on Yorkshire has been ramped up.
The independent panel, which was appointed by Yorkshire, concluded that a racially offensive term used repeatedly towards Rafiq about his Pakistani heritage by a current Yorkshire player was regarded as friendly banter, and that player was therefore cleared of wrongdoing. Now that obviously sparked outrage and has intensified doubts about the whole process and the conclusion that the club was not institutionally racist.
A British woman has won a legal battle against Australian tax authorities after the High Court of Australia ruled she'd been subjected to a more burdensome taxation due to her nationality. Catherine Addy worked in Australia between 2015 and 2017 and had to pay the so-called backpack levy. The case means thousands of other foreign workers could now be owed money from the Australia Tax Office. And that's the BBC News at 11:03.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
It is 11:03. Simon King is the man who's going to bring us all the weather. And Simon, the hat has come out. Big coat, a scarf, and a hat. Not a woolly hat just yet, but a hat has come out. It's cold.
Definitely, yeah. For southern areas in particular, we've had some frost over the last couple of nights. So yeah, temperatures
sunny
down to
though.
-2 degrees. Sunny, yeah. So for many, it's been that kind of cold, crisp but sunny sort of morning. So it's been quite pleasant, I imagine. There has also been some patches of mist and fog though around as well, making it look a little bit atmospheric. But certainly, yeah, frost across southern areas, and for all of us it's going to feel pretty chilly today as well, because we've got a northerly or northwesterly wind, and that means the air is coming in from the Arctic, and it means that there will be a wind chill today. But there is lots of dry, lots of bright and sunny weather out there at the moment. Some areas of showers to talk about. The first is northern Scotland. Showers continuing here. They could be a bit wintry over higher ground. Showers moving southeastward across Northern Ireland at the moment. Also showers in northeast England, down in towards Lincolnshire, and those will drift their way into the Midlands from time to time. And the other area of showers is from West Wales to the southwest of England. This is known as a Pembrokeshire dangler, and that's just going to continue to bring showers in these parts during the afternoon. Maximum temperatures 6 to 12 degrees, but as I mentioned, there will be a wind chill.
Hi, I'm Liz Bonnen. Welcome to a special episode of What Planet Are We On?
Available now on BBC Sounds.
We wanted to make this episode because of a big UN conference, COP26, in Glasgow. So what is it and what is set to happen at it?
COP26 is a meeting of all of the countries that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
We'll hear a lot of messages focused on those key themes that the UK is ready to step up towards.
What planet are we on?
We hope we've helped to shed some light on this historic event.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
The voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
Naga Manchetti. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Good morning to you. Okay, we're going to head straight to the topic of COP this morning. Money as well is dominating those UN climate talks in Glasgow. The BBC's economics editor, Faisal Islam, said the giant laser beam of global finance will be fired towards technologies that lower carbon emissions and away from investments in coal, oil and gas. Okay, so the money's appearingly going in the right direction. Let's find out more. Our correspondent in Glasgow, of course, is Adam Fleming, our political correspondent. Adam, morning to you.
Hello.
Is it sunny and bright and cold up there?
It's lovely, although if you'd ever actually made it to the Blue Zone, Naga, I'm sorry that you didn't get to get
it. Was a night.
You basically end up sort of sealed. You end up being sealed in it all day.
Yes.
You don't really get to see the outside world.
Well, it was a very miserable day on Monday, wasn't it? So it kind of being sealed inside perhaps wouldn't have been too bad. Yes, I had a nightmare with the trains, as many people did, for getting up there. Never mind. There will be another time, I hope. Listen, I spoke to Mark Carney.
COP27.
Yeah, exactly, COP27. Hey, wouldn't it be great if there wasn't a need for it? Mark Carney, former Bank of England, now UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, former Governor of the Bank of England. We ran an interview I did with him earlier this week, and talking about his ambitions, and now he's announced this financial initiative. So the money is going towards the good things.
So basically what Mark Carney has done is he's got the whole financial sector together, whether it's banks, insurance companies, credit rating agencies, asset managers, pension funds, and got a whole lot of them to basically sort of effectively sign up to the Paris Climate Change Agreement about limiting the increase in global temperatures. Basically what international governments did 6 years ago in Paris. And the idea now is that the finance, which let's be honest is one of the things that makes the world go round, is now aligned with the governments and aligned with this mission to reduce carbon emissions to limit the increase in global temperatures. So he's claiming that if you add up all the money that those firms have available that have signed up to this, you're talking about $130 trillion. Do you remember when we used to think a billion was a lot? We're now into the trillions territory.
Well, is it enough?
Well, this good question. There's lots of small print here because, okay, that's money that's available to be invested in things in the future. That's not necessarily money that's being spent on projects you might call green right now. Also, lots of activists will say, hang on, the ground rules of this initiative mean that banks and firms can still invest in coal, oil, gas, fossil fuels, which we're trying to get rid of. To which Mark Carney would probably say, well, you know what? Look, if you withdraw that option from these firms straight away, then their business models collapse. He calls it stranded assets, is the technical term. So you've actually got to phase those things out over time rather than having a big bang. And also Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has been here as well, and his side of the pie is less the numbers, it's more the process. And what he's announced today is that in the next couple of years, any firm listing on the London Stock Exchange or financial firm doing business in London will have to publish a transition plan for how they are going to help the world get to net zero, what contribution they're going to make. And that will mean we and investors will be able to see which companies are serious about doing it rather than just relying on them saying that they're serious about doing it. So Rishi Sunak's providing a process. Mark Carney says he can provide a lot of cash.
Okay, perfect segue into my next guest. Adam, I'll let you go. Do enjoy the sunshine up there. I want to hear all about it when we next meet.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, so there's a move by Mark Carney and Rishi Sunak, of course. Let's talk now from COP26 in Glasgow. Matt Britton, who's Google's President of Europe, Middle East and Africa. And also, I'll be talking to Pierre Slamich, who's the co-founder of Open Food Facts, which is developing an eco-score to help consumers see the environmental impact of food and drink products. Matt, Pierre, good morning.
Morning, Naga.
Morning.
Morning. Matt, can I begin with you? I don't know how much you heard of our political correspondent Adam Fleming there, talking about basically companies just having to prove what they do is good towards getting towards net zero, and so to entice investors or to keep investors' faith. How will that work with Google?
Well, I think it's so important that we're seeing at COP governments and companies and finance coming together to take collective action. And I think it's really clear that technology is going to play a key part in that. So from a Google point of view, we already have tools that help you and your family.
Oh, sorry, no, I don't want to talk about
choices.
technology just yet. Sorry,
Oh,
Matt.
sorry.
I want to talk about the company as a whole, showing investors that it is serious about going towards net zero targets and how that will impact on it financially and with investment.
Yeah, so if I step back and look at what's the implications for a company like Google? Well, we already have investors who want to see us being more sustainable. There isn't strong measurement, and that's one of the reasons technology will play a role to hold companies accountable for what they are doing. What we've tried to do is publish our progress as we've moved from being carbon neutral since 2007 to being one of the world's biggest purchasers of renewable energy. 2017, all of our electricity is matched by renewables. And we, like others, are setting out bold goals for what we're doing in the next few years, which is for us to try to become carbon-free. So every time you search or you look for a route or you watch a YouTube video, there's no carbon involved at all. And actually the good news on that is we've already got 2 or 3 data centers in Europe which are running on renewables over 90% of the time. So accountability is absolutely right, as you say. Investors want to see that, employees want to see it, and of course our users want to see it.
Have you done any research on seeing whether or not investors have picked Google because of its environmental efforts over other, say, technology companies?
I think we're seen as being responsible in this area, and the more we publish and the more we're transparent, I think more investors make those choices. There are other sectors which are more in the sort of front line of emissions here because we're already very low in our emissions and one of the leaders on getting to kind of carbon-free operations. So I think that's one of the things. But also, investors want to invest in the technology that's going to help, and that's where I think these things interconnect. So it's not just what we do in the services that you use, hopefully every day and enjoy, but it's also how we work with companies, other companies, to transform. So moving to the cloud, move to the greenest, cleanest cloud, but also we work with cities. So we just announced yesterday we're moving from working with 500 cities around the world, including Glasgow and London, using environmental insights to help look at where you can put solar, where are the sources of pollution. And Mayor Sadiq Khan's just taken over chairmanship of a big group of cities globally. We're going to work with 20,000 cities around the world to help them find ways of being greener and cleaner. So again, technology has a part to play there in the transparency that you're talking about.
This is going to sound like a very odd request, Matt, but it's almost like, tell me the story of a day. Say I live in a day, right? I wake up and I don't have a Google phone, but say I had a Google phone, and it starts with me turning the alarm off on my Google phone and going through my day. Tell me how Google is going to take an average person's day and contribute to making it more climate change friendly, or more climate friendly.
It's a great question. It's a great question, actually, because this is all about practical
Without
action
being an
that we can
advert,
do.
please.
No, of course. I'll just take you through how things work. So if you choose to use Google search, for example, you're planning a trip to Glasgow. And
no,
you
I've started with turning the alarm off. So the phone, the actual phone.
Okay. Well, so your phone is accessing services in the cloud, apps and so on. And if we're hosting them, then those apps are running on a carbon neutral cloud, and a cloud that's increasingly carbon free. When you start to do something with your phone, if you'll allow me to suggest things you might do with your phone, for example, you might watch a video that somebody sent to you on YouTube. That's carbon free. Or carbon neutral today, moving to carbon free. You might then decide, I need to start to look at something. I need a new boiler. So you research a boiler. And in the coming months, we're going to help people looking for energy-intensive products to see the energy rating, so that you can make not just a choice based on price and availability and convenience, but also you can factor in the eco-impact of that choice. If you're taking a trip, we already have eco-friendly hotels. We show you the credentials of hotels, and crucially on flights. Today, if you look at Google Flight Search, you can see not just the price and the convenience of a flight, but you can see, is that flight more or less than the average flight for that destination based on the age of the aircraft and data from the Environment Agency in Europe. So we're trying to help you have extra information to inform those kind of choices that you make through your day for you and your family.
I will
you then
continue.
go to work. The same thing applies to companies and their working environment.
I'll continue with the day in just a second, but you know, when it comes to specifically with the phone, we've had, there have been changes, haven't there, to try to make chargers universal, so that when you change your phone, if you have to change your phone, you're not buying another charger. Why do we need to change phones so often? Are you looking at the actual practical, the physical phone, that in itself being more environmentally friendly, so that we don't have to keep changing them?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're not a huge manufacturer of phones ourselves, although Pixel phones are increasingly popular and they use recycled materials a lot.
And tablets,
the big thing we do, the big thing we do now is we make operating systems. So Chrome as a browser, Chromebooks you'll have seen. One of the great things we did recently, we acquired a small business called Neverware. Loads of computers, old Windows machines, are sitting gathering dust, particularly in schools. Over 30,000, I think, computers are locked in cupboards in schools that are not being used anymore because they're too old and slow. With Neverware, in 30 minutes, you can install software that turns your knackered old Windows machine into a Chromebook. And that will enable you to make new life out of an old machine. That's a great way, a clever software-driven way of turning old hardware into something new. That's a good example of the kind of things which we want to innovate in. Same thing with phone. We make Android. It's an operating system. Actually, you can buy an Android phone that does pretty much what your fruit-based device does for sort of $35 in Africa. Getting people online through low-cost devices and recycling and repurposing devices for those economies is vital, because half the planet still doesn't have the benefit of the technology you described with your alarm clock first thing in the morning, and we need to bring those people online. And that's a big part also of COP, is those are the poorest people in the countries most affected by the climate crisis. They today create 10% or less of emissions, and Mark Carney's wall of money has to go to help them as well.
You know, we talk about this wall of money. You know what I'm going to ask you, because I have to ask you this when it comes to Google. Tax. Corporation tax. So, you've had this question many times before, and I'd be interested to hear your answer, because Mark Carney has made very clear the money is going to go to companies that, one, affect climate change, but you've alluded to it when you're talking about, it's a form of levelling up, I suppose, making sure that poor countries have access to technology to be able to be better to the environment. I'll give you the figures. Revenues, £1.8 billion. Corporation tax for the UK, £50 million. If money talks, and that is what we've been told, Mark Carney's made it really clear, money is needed to change, to affect change. If you paid more tax, that would help, wouldn't it? If you paid a fair amount of tax, that would be more useful.
You're absolutely right. You know, there's a big bill to pay for the pandemic, there's a big bill to pay for the climate crisis, and companies and individuals are going to have to pay more. For us, just to correct you from a Google standpoint, what we need to see is international tax reform, because we actually pay 20% corporation tax on average across the years across the world. The challenge is it's not paid in the countries where they want to see the money paid. So we're headquartered in America, the majority is paid there. Now, tax reform is back on the agenda, thank God, and we want to see it simplified so that you get taxes that every person in the street understands are fairer. So that's something for the reform agenda, which is coming forward again now, so I'll be pleased to see that. But we expect...
Oh, when do you think that will happen?
Companies should expect to pay their part. Well, it's up to the G20, I think, where the ball now lies, because they have to agree this. It's not just technology companies, any company operating internationally pays its taxes where the intellectual property is created or where the headquarters are, and so there needs to be reform to shift that so that it's more about where the consumption of products exists. It's a rather technical thing, but it's something which has to happen because it just doesn't make sense to the person in the streets, and people running companies want to see that too. We want to see that reform. Meanwhile,
Have you put that money
we want to spend
aside?
our time.
Have you put that
Sorry?
money aside? Do you know if that money's been put aside?
No, well, we pay that money already because we pay that.
No, but what you would pay if it was
average
fair,
rate.
if the system was more fair.
Well, the money would be distributed differently across countries, and then there's also an argument about what the rate of tax is across countries, and that's for individual governments. So we pay the money today. The question is how it's distributed in the future, and also what the rate of tax on corporations is around the world. It's likely it's going to need to be higher to pay these bills for the pandemic and the climate crisis.
Talk to me about the rest of this day that we're living. So I've decided I'm going to go out to dinner. And I'm going to leave work, and I've got an option. It's chucking down with rain. How do I get there? How do I choose where to eat?
Yeah, so great question, and people use Google Maps a lot, as you probably know. And what we're doing with Google Maps is we're going to show you by default the most eco-friendly route, unless there's a big gap in time, in which case you'll give you the option. And this is a real opportunity here because we've estimated that we can save the equivalent of 200,000 cars a year just by slightly better routing that people choose on Google Maps. And that's the cumulative effect of billions of journeys across a year. But that kind of thing can be incredibly helpful. And again, we think we'll arm you with that information. You might choose, because of your timing,